At 11:47 on a Thursday night, Daniel Reed locked the doors of the repair shop his father had left him and made a decision he had postponed for 3 years. He would sell it in the morning. The garage had once been loud with customers and his father's terrible singing. Since the funeral, every tool seemed to remember a voice Daniel was trying not to miss. On the workbench lay one unfinished job, a dark blue 1967 pickup. Its owner had died before collecting it, and Daniel had restored it simply because abandoning it felt cruel. That night, a violent storm swallowed the valley. When the power failed, the old truck's radio turned on by itself and whispered a date through the static. October 17th, 1499. Daniel laughed once, uneasily. Then the garage door lifted without power. Beyond it, lightning had formed a perfect white circle above the empty county road. He should have stayed. Instead, he grabbed his father's emergency bag, climbed into the truck, and drove toward the light, convinced someone might be stranded beyond it. The road vanished beneath the tires. For 3 breathless seconds there was no rain, no engine, and no sky, only the sound of a child calling for help. The truck landed hard in deep mud. Dawn rose over stone walls, watchtowers, vineyards, and people wearing clothes Daniel had only seen in museums. Villagers scattered from the horseless machine. A mounted guard lowered his spear. Daniel raised both hands, realizing the radio had not predicted the past. It had opened it. Before the guard could seize him, a thin boy with a red scarf stepped between them. He offered Daniel half a piece of bread and said his name was Luca. Luca was 12, an orphan, an apprentice to the town's aging clockmaker. He walked with a broken wooden leg brace that cut his skin every time he moved. The boy told the guards Daniel was a traveling healer. It was a reckless lie, but it bought them enough time to hide the truck in an abandoned mill. Inside the mill, Luca studied the engine with astonishment. Daniel studied Luca's brace and saw something simpler. 2 cracked hinges, a twisted strap, and pain nobody had bothered to fix. Using a socket wrench, leather from the emergency bag, and a strip of rubber, Daniel rebuilt the brace. Luca stood without flinching for the first time in months. He did not thank Daniel with words. He crossed the dusty room 3 times, then laughed so loudly that birds burst from the rafters. Daniel had forgotten what honest joy sounded like. Luca revealed why the town was afraid. The river had risen behind a damaged wooden dam, and officials were hiding the danger to prevent panic before the harvest market. The clockmaker had designed a warning bell powered by water, but the governor dismissed him. Luca believed Daniel's strange machine could help prove the flood was coming. Daniel wanted only to return home. The lightning circle, however, had vanished. The truck's battery was fading, and the radio now showed a countdown ending of the next storm. He had less than 2 days. Helping the town could cost his only chance to leave, but walking away would condemn families who had no idea they were in danger. At the river, Daniel recognized the signs immediately. Fresh cracks, trembling supports, and water forcing through rotten timber. The dam would not survive another night of rain. He drew a simple evacuation map. Luca translated his instructions, but the governor accused them of spreading fear and ordered the truck taken for the town's defense. Daniel could have used the engine to escape. Instead, he removed the distributor cap and handed it to Luca, making the truck useless to anyone who tried to steal it. That small act of trust changed the boy. No adult had ever placed something important in Luca's hands without first warning him not to fail. Together, they visited homes after dark. They marked safe paths with strips of red cloth and asked bakers, farmers, and washerwomen to move children and elders uphill before midnight. Some laughed. Others closed their doors. Then an elderly woman recognized Daniel as the stranger who had repaired Luca's brace without demanding payment, and she agreed to listen. Kindness traveled faster than authority. One family warned another. The baker rang his oven bell. Lanterns appeared in windows, each one quietly signaling readiness. Near midnight, rain began. The river struck the dam like a giant fist. The governor finally ordered an evacuation, but the main bridge was already disappearing beneath the water. Daniel reached the seized truck, replaced the hidden part, and turned the headlights toward the old service bridge. For frightened villagers, those beams became a road through darkness. He drove slowly beside the crowd, using the horn as a signal. Luca limped from family to family, repeating the same promise: follow the light, and nobody walks alone. Halfway across, a wagon wheel broke. Daniel stopped, although water was rising around the tires. He lifted an elderly passenger while strangers joined together to move the wagon. The dam failed minutes later. Water swept through the lower market, but every person who had followed the red cloth reached the hill alive. The governor stared at the flooded streets and understood that the outsider he feared had sacrificed his escape to save people who might never believe his story. Then the radio crackled. The white circle would return for only 90 seconds at sunrise on the western road beyond the town gate. The truck was nearly out of fuel. Worse, the western road had collapsed. The only remaining path crossed a field too soft for heavy wheels. The villagers did what Daniel had done for them. Farmers laid doors, planks, and tables across the mud. The blacksmith repaired the bent axle. Nobody asked what they would receive. Luca worked beside Daniel until dawn. He confessed that he feared being forgotten more than he feared being poor. Daniel understood, because he had been living with the same fear. Daniel told him that being remembered was not something people could demand. It was something they earned by making another person's life less lonely. At the western gate, the storm opened like a bright wound in the sky. Daniel started the engine, but Luca held out a tiny lantern charm carved from olive wood. Luca said lanterns did not remove the darkness. They simply helped someone take the next step. Daniel placed the charm around his neck and promised to keep the light moving. There was no time for a long goodbye. Daniel drove toward the circle while the entire town stood behind Luca, their lanterns raised in silent gratitude. The garage returned around him in a burst of thunder. Only 4 minutes had passed. The storm was ending, and the morning buyer was already pulling into the driveway. Daniel reached for the sale papers, then saw a framed photograph on the wall that had never existed before. His father as a boy, standing beside a community workshop. Below the photograph was a small brass plaque. The workshop had been founded by the Reed family in 1908 to teach repair skills to children without homes. Daniel searched the office and found ledgers spanning generations. Every page carried the same symbol, a tiny lantern surrounded by the words, "No one walks alone." The family history, he remembered, had changed. His father had not inherited an ordinary garage. He had inherited a tradition Daniel had nearly sold. Inside the oldest ledger was a copied letter from 1519. It described an inventor named Luca Bellandi who built safer bridges and opened free workshops for orphan apprentices. The final line made Daniel sit down. Luca wrote that everything began when a lost traveler repaired what everyone else had decided was not worth fixing. Daniel drove to the county museum with the wooden charm still around his neck. A curator led him to a recently donated Renaissance portrait. The portrait showed Luca as an old man, standing beside plans for a rescue wagon with bright forward lamps. Around his neck hung the matching lantern. Daniel finally understood the real miracle. He had not changed history with a truck. He had changed one frightened boy's belief about his own worth. And Luca had spent the rest of his life passing that belief to others, until 5 centuries later it reached the father who had raised Daniel. Daniel returned to the garage and tore the sale papers in half. He repainted the faded sign and added 2 words beneath the family name: Community Workshop. The first visitor was a quiet foster teenager named Eli, carrying a bicycle with a broken chain. He asked how much the repair would cost. Daniel looked at the lantern charm, handed Eli a wrench, and said the repair was free if the boy agreed to learn how to help the next person. Within months, the empty garage became noisy again. Veterans taught welding, retired teachers helped with homework, and teenagers repaired bicycles for families who could not afford them. Daniel still missed his father, but grief no longer made the garage silent. It had become the reason he kept the doors open after sunset. One evening, Eli asked whether the old blue truck had ever done anything important. Daniel smiled and said it once carried a light farther than any road could measure. He never told the full story. Some truths sound impossible when spoken aloud, yet become obvious in the lives they leave behind. If this story reminded you of someone who helped when nobody else noticed, share it with them. A small kindness may travel farther than either of you will ever see. And if you believe the world needs more stories where ordinary people choose compassion, please like this video and subscribe to Kindness Lantern Stories. Together, we keep the light moving.